Welcome to our daily Rambam shiur according to the path of 3 chapters per day. Today we will be covering chapter 4, 5 and 6 in Hilchos Teshuvah. Since it is very fundamental issues that are being discussed, and the Rambam addresses today the core existential issues that so many people of mankind in general are asking. So I will start with the second chapter, and I will start as usually with a story. So the story goes about one of the famous Magidim of all time, known as the Dubner Magid, the Magid of Dubna. What was so special about him that he was able to transmit the greatest idea via a story that reflects the life, the reality of the shtetl, of the lifestyles the Jews were accustomed to throughout Europe in the last few centuries. So he shared a story about 2 brothers who grew up in a very, very wealthy family. And they had all their needs were taken care of. They were raised by a loving and a wonderful family. The only problem that one brother, he was nebach, deaf. He was a perfect person. He was not able to hear. He was hearing impaired, so he was not able to hear anything. The other brother, he was also very wonderful, smart. He had only one problem. He was blind. He was blind. He was not able to see anything. Since their parents had so much money and the boys were growing up, and it was time to find for them matches, a shidduch, so they were approached the best shadchanim, and the greatest shadchan of all time, he came up with a genius idea. He found for them the perfect matches. For the deaf person, he found one of the most beautiful girls of his time. The only thing that she was never stopped cursing. She cursed a whole day and a whole night. Her mouth was just so filthy, so obnoxious, but it was a perfect match. He was deaf. He was not able to hear anything. So he lived very happily with this beautiful but filthy mouth lady. And to the blind boy, he found a very pleasant girl, very nice girl, but she was the ugliest girl possible. But given the fact that he was blind, it was perfectly fine. He was never able to see how ugly she was, and it never bothered him. And they both lived very happily with each other, and their wealth, since they lived with a very wealthy family, as we said, kept growing and growing and growing. And after a while, they said, well, now that all our needs are being taken care of, it's about time to go and treat our major problem. Let's go and find a doctor that will be able to cure our basic problem. And after a while, the greatest doctor of all time came to town. And the doctor, he looked at the problems of the deaf person and of the blind person, and he was able to heal both of them. What happened, immediately after they left the office of the doctor, they were extremely happy. However, their happiness shorted for a very, very, very short time, because the blind person came home and just figured out how ugly and how terribly ugly is the wife that he is living with. And the deaf person, suddenly he was able to hear the screaming, the cursing, the filthy mouth of his wife. So their problems have just started. They were so sad, angry, frustrated, that when the bill for the healing by the doctor came to their house, they refused to pay. The doctor obviously took them to court. He says, hey, I came from far, I brought my entire equipment, I put so much effort, and I healed you. You gotta pay. So the judge turns to one of the brothers and he says, what do you have to say about this claim? He says, what are you talking about? Until this doctor came, life was perfect. Was not the most possible perfect, because I thought and I had a really defect. But since he so-called fixed my defect, my life started to be really hell on earth. The person who was married, the beautiful girl, but the filthy mouth, he says, I'm never experienced so much anger, frustration, aggravation as I have experienced since after you have healed me. And the other person says, I am experiencing over here the most terrible experience to realize with what type of ugly person I live, and only after you healed me and you have the dare audacity to go and send me an invoice, a bill to pay for it. The judge hears, he says, seemingly they have a logical argument. So he turns back to the doctor and says, so what do you have to say about their rebuttal? He says, no problem. I have a perfect solution. I am able to blind again the person who I just healed him from the blindness, and I can make deaf again the person who I just cured him from his deafness. When they heard this suggestion that the doctor have just entertained, says, no. We rather pay you, live with our problems, and continue life as it was. This story, the Dubner Maggid have used in order to explain how can a person may think about the fact that he may escape judgment and liability and responsibility for his deeds. Because every person may have an argument since he was born without being asked, since he is alive without being asked, since he will be dying at a certain expiry date without being asked. So what is his liability? What is the basis of his accountability for each and every action, speech, or thought that he is about to produce? This is a major theological, philosophical question that every creature who was created in this world. So the Dubner Maggid used this story in order to say it's true. A person came to this world without being asked. He is alive without being asked. But yet when he is already alive, he takes care of himself. He's very careful not to get sick, not to get in harm's way, not to stay away from any potential danger that may harm him. So by doing so, he is displaying a continuous consent and agreement to the condition that he is. Given his own continuous ongoing display of acknowledgement, consent, and agreement to the condition that he was placed, this is the basis of his liability and accountability for his deeds. He supported this story also with an interesting rule. There is a rule: if a person has a house, has a property, and suddenly his neighbors, who is next door to him, made a fence from the east side of the house, from the north side of the house, and from the west side of the house. He may have an argument, well, I didn't ask you to put the fence. I don't have to share the cost. However, at the moment that this individual who refused to share the cost, with his own initiative, he went ahead and he just added the final southern fence. He built himself a fence on the southern border of his own property. That way he's totally surrounded with four sides by the fence. By doing so, the individual display and demonstrates an agreement and consent for the other three fences. So the rule is, at the moment that you have demonstrated and you show that you are happy by the fact that you have just added the fourth fence, you gotta share the cost of the previous three sides as well. So a person as well is being surrounded by God with three fences. Fence number one, that against your will you were born. Fence number two, against your will you are alive. Fence number three, against your will you will be dead. So those type of three fences were placed by the so-called neighbor in this God, his creation, against his will. But each and every moment we live, we supply our digestive system with food. We are being dressed. We are doing stuff in order to upgrade our life quality. We continuously in a pursuit of growth and pleasure to enhance our life. By doing so, we are demonstrating a consent and willingness and agreement. Therefore, this itself is the basis for our accountability and liability for the rest of our stuff. This is just an introduction to the Rambam of today that is being, again, as I said, divided into three topics. Topic number one, what are the 24 items that will prevent or make difficult or almost impossible for a person to do Teshuvah? For example, when a person is helping others to do sins, when a person is buying or supporting people who are thieves, when a person is being fed from stolen items, when a person is not protesting against things that are wrong that are being done, and so on and so forth. There is about a list of 24 items similar to what we have just said that will make a person difficult to do Teshuvah. This is the issue in the first chapter. In the second chapter of today's Rambam, he is raising the issue that people are generally faced, whether a person has really a choice to go on the right path, or external condition as genetics, neighborhood, education, surrounding, environment are factors that predetermining in advance his outcome. And the Rambam introduces basically the view as he defines the crowd. Many of the crowd believes that there is no such a thing as real freedom of choice. And the Rambam writes it's nonsense. According to the Torah, there is and must be a free will, and there must be for two reasons. Reason number one, what is the point that God gives reward to the righteous and punishes the wicked if everything is predetermined? if it is predetermined that the righteous will do good, it's not his credit, and therefore he doesn't deserve to get the reward. And same thing, the wicked person, if he was forced by external factors to do evil, so again, there is no reason, there is no justification to go and punish him, because he was already, his way was already dictated. So therefore, from the fact that one of the major principles of the Jewish faith is reward and punishment, therefore must be a freedom of choice given. Further than this, said the Rambam, you cannot go, what's the point for God to introduce a set of rules and orders if everything is already predetermined? There is no point to give you an order, to give you a mitzvah, do or don't do, if it's already predetermined. So from the fact that we do have a set of mitzvot, this itself proves that there is a freedom of choice. The only dilemma that the Rambam addresses, how can we reconcile between the principles of freedom of choice on one hand, and yet the principle that God is known, he knows everything that will happen. So if everything is already known by God, so is it possible that something will take place in reality in a surprise? If it is already known that in the future a person will do good or bad, can the person surprise God and do something that is... So this is an issue that is being raised by the Rambam, and he is explaining that there is a difference between what we call knowledge that we are familiar from our world, because a knowledge by us is a knowledge that comes as a result of action that is being done outside of us. And then there is the knowledge of God. The knowledge of God is basically the source of energy that provides life and vitality to creation. So therefore, any action that is being done is not that God knows after it's being done, but God itself is the cause of everything that is being done. So by us, our type of knowledge that we are familiar with can be a contradiction to freedom of choice. But the type of knowledge that God has, as we were speaking in the previous rules of Hilchos Yesodei HaTorah, that it's totally outside of our comprehension and familiarity, this type of knowledge is not a contradiction to a freedom of choice. So this is the topic that the Rambam goes in the second chapter of today's shiur, which is Perek Daled, the fourth chapter in Hilchos Teshuvah. The fifth chapter in Hilchos Teshuvah, that's what he deals with, the issue of freedom of choice versus knowledge of God.
It doesn't prevent, it is not contradicting each other.
Yeah, precisely. In the final chapter, which is the sixth chapter of Hilchos Teshuvah, the Rambam deals with quotations in the Bible and the Torah that seemingly we find certain individuals who were taken the freedom of choice. For example, everybody knows that Paroi, God was already telling to Moshe Rabbeinu that I will harden his heart, and he won't let you go unless I will whip him with the 10 lashes, as I have done, as we are celebrating Passover. So here we see that God have taken away the freedom of choice. Yeah. So he answered that each and every person, given the fact that he has a freedom of choice initially, And when he's choosing the right way, he is being rewarded accordingly. Yet when he is choosing the wrong way, the punishment or the negative consequence of his action can come in a few ways. Can come in a physical torture, financial loss, physical loss, and it can come also in losing the most important assets, spiritual assets a person possesses. What is the spiritual asset a person possesses? The ability to choose between right and wrong. Because when God Almighty created Odom Horishin, he says, Hein Odom, the man will be ke'achad mimenu, like one of us. Same way as God has a freedom of choice, God, with his greatest will, he have gifted the freedom of choice. But this gift is not an unconditional gift. This gift is being taken away when the person demonstrated by his action that he doesn't deserve to have this gift. And Paroi, he was one of those people who was demonstrating with his action that he doesn't deserve to get this gift, and for that reason it was taken away from him. For that reason, said the Rambam, we are praying always in our prayers that God Almighty have mercy upon us, and always, even though we may not deserve, that this special gift of freedom of choice should never be taken away from us. So this is, in a nutshell, the summary of today's Rambam. I would urge you also, it is in Mishneh Torah in Hilchos Teshuvah, chapter 4, 5th and 6th. Today is available both in Russian and in Hebrew and English, so you can go and dwell much longer. Thank you.
For the blind guy, there is one problem. He could